Hello everybody. So today we're going to start off by talking a little bit about energy. So when we think about energy on Earth, it comes from two sources. You have heat energy contained in the core of the Earth from when the Earth was created, and then you have solar energy, which comes from the sun. So even certain types of energy that you may not originally think are solar actually do originate from energy from the sun. So if you're looking at things like wind energy, you think, okay, the air moves, spins the turbine, you get the energy out that way. But if you actually think about it, you have to think about why is the air moving. So the air is moving because the sun heats the air masses unevenly, which causes the movement, which causes the wind. So even though it doesn't seem like it's solar, the energy is originating there. And of course, when we think about solar energy, the first thing that usually comes to mind are solar cells. And that's actually what we're going to be talking about today. So I've been interested in solar cells. I've been researching this for a little bit over a year. I actually have been proposing a project for my senior chemistry project based on solar cells and using silver nanoparticles to enhance their efficiency, or hopefully enhance their efficiency. But before you understand any of that, it's helpful to understand how solar cells work, and that's what we're really going to talk about today. It's just the basic operation of a solar cell, what's happening at the level of electrons. How do they work? Why do they work? And to do that, you need to understand a few basic chemical concepts, which I will go through first. We need to talk about light. We need to talk about band structures, and we need to talk about conduction. And then once we've covered those, we'll go on and I'll explain to you the concepts to explain to you the operation of a basic solar cell. So the very first thing we need to cover is light. When we're talking about light, we can think of it in one of two ways. So light can be described as a particle or a wave. So a particle of light is called a photon, and think of it as just like a discrete packet of energy. On the flip side, light can also be described as a wave. So a wave of light consists of magnetic and an electric field oscillating perpendicular to each other. There's a chance we'll be switching between these two in the talk, so just so you're aware that both are correct. You can use both, and usually we decide depending on the situation which one's easier to work with. Now, before we move on to solar cells, we should also just talk about band structures. So the textbook, the Inorganic Chemistry, the Structure of Principles and Activities, describe a band structure as a continuous region of energy where electrons are permitted to exist. So when we're thinking about this, we think about bonding. So you probably talked about bonding in your high school chemistry classes a little bit. You talked about covalent bonds, ionic bonds, that kind of thing. As we move further and further along into what's actually happening, they get more and more complicated, but they get more correct in their descriptions. So the description I'm going to use today when we're talking about bonding is called molecular orbital theory. It's under the realm of quantum mechanics, basically. So when we're looking at this, and this first diagram is a molecular orbital diagram. And what we're looking at here, we have energy going up your y-axis. This strip here on the graph shows one atom just by itself. This other one shows another atom, what it looks like energetically by itself. And then this middle strip here is what happens when we bring them together. So when we think about atoms bonding, you have two atoms, they come together, their electrons are going to interact with each other, and that's how the bonds are going to form. But what's important, the takeaway for our purposes when we're doing this, is what we need to look at is if you have an atom with one atomic orbital coming to an atom with another atomic orbital, when these orbitals interact, you're going to get two bonding orbitals. So that's the really important thing to remember, is that when you have two coming in, and this line here represents an orbital in one atom, this line represents an orbital in one atom, these ones each have one electron in them. When they come together, you get two orbitals. And these orbitals each have their own unique energy level, they're discrete, the electrons won't move between them. But that's in the case of only two atoms. When we start talking about a solid, where if you think about it, you have hundreds of thousands of atoms all interacting together to create this structure that gives you the solid. So when that happens, each of these individual atoms has orbitals, whether it be 1 or 2 or whatever. So if each atom contributes a single orbital into the bonding of this structure, you're going to get as many bonds as you have orbitals. So if you're looking at this diagram here, what we're looking at is we have n. So n is the number of atoms here. So one atom, simple, one orbital. But if you have 2 atoms, when they bond together, you're going to get 2 bonding orbitals. When you have n equals 3, you get 3. And as you move up and up and up, you're increasing the number of orbitals, these energy levels where electrons exist. And it gets to a point where when you have so many of these things coming together, that these energy levels where electrons are allowed to exist get so close together that we can consider them continuous. And that's what happens when a band forms. So this last strip here, you no longer have the individual lines. Essentially, it's a continuous realm of energy where you have electrons existing, and there are multiple bands within a solid. So bands become really important when we talk about conduction. In conduction, so whether or not a substance of solid will conduct electricity depends on the band structure within that solid. So you have 3 main categories of conductors. You have an insulator, and that's something that does not conduct electricity. You have a conductor, something like a metal, which will conduct electricity. And then you have a middle ground, we call that a semiconductor. So it conducts electricity some of the time, under certain circumstances. And to explain this, we look at the bands. So these blue lines here are essentially representing inner shell electrons. So the ones inside, close to the nucleus, they don't really interact with the electrons for their atoms. So these bands are completely filled. These electrons are happy where they are. They're not going to move about too much or do anything. And then the next band up is called the valence band. So the valence band is the highest energy band where electrons exist. And in an insulator and a semiconductor, the valence band is completely filled with electrons. There's no room to put any more electrons in there. And then the next band on top of that one, the first completely empty band, is called the conduction band. So when you're looking at an insulator, what's really important to look at is this huge gap in energy between the valence band and the conduction band. So it would take a very large input of energy for an electron to be able to move from here to here. And generally speaking, that's not something that really happens in an insulator, but that's also why they don't conduct electricity. So electricity, as we've probably heard, is the movement of electrons. So in order for something to conduct electricity, electrons have to be free to move. And what we were talking about before, the valence band, when these are completely filled, there's no space for the electrons to go anywhere. However, if you could get one up to the conduction band is completely empty. It's nothing but open space. So the electrons in a conduction band can move about. And that's what happens in the semiconductor. So the semiconductor has a much smaller band gap than your insulator. And it's small enough that, say, something kind of energy, so if we're talking about solar cells, we're talking about light. So if a photon of light comes in here, collides with an electron, that energy from the photon is transferred to the electron. The electron increases in energy. This gap is small enough that it can bump the electron up into the next energy level. So now you have an electron in your conduction band, and remember, in the conduction band, the electrons can move. And that's how a semiconductor will conduct electricity. If we go to the furthest end of the spectrum, when we're talking about a conductor, what you have is your valence band and your conduction band are one and the same. So the valence band isn't completely filled. It's not jam-packed with electrons. So there is space within that to move, and that's why these ones, it's so easy for these substances to conduct electricity. Now, when we're talking solar cells, the semiconductor is what we talk about because that's what's used as a primary absorber in a solar cell. In a general basic solar cell is going to be a semiconductor, and silicon is used primarily So what happens, like we talked about before, is that's how it absorbs the energy. So the light comes in, interacts with an electron here, the electron's bumped up to this higher energy level, and then it's free to move about. So once you have that electron that's free to move around, you need to have some way to provide a force, something to push it in one direction or the other. So to do that, we use N-type and P-type semiconductors. We'll explain exactly how that works in a little bit, but first I'm going to touch on what exactly an N-type and a P-type semiconductor is. So you have two different types of semiconductors. There's an intrinsic or an extrinsic. So intrinsic is a pure semiconductor. So if it's silicon, the silicon structure contains only silicon atoms. However, when you have an extrinsic, so it's another word we use is a doped semiconductor, what you're doing is you're incorporating other elements into the structure. So there's two types, N-type, and N-type we can think of as promoting negative charge. So what you're going to do, you take a silicon semiconductor, let's say silicon has 5 valence electrons. You're going to take an atom with 6 valence electrons and incorporate it into the structure. So when this happens, these extra electrons, and that's these black dots represented on the diagram here, and again we have the valence band and conduction band just like before. These extra electrons exist in an energy level that is very, very close to the conduction band. So it takes very little energy for this electron to be promoted into the conduction band. So this type of semiconductor is going to promote the presence of electrons or negative charge in the conduction band. And then on the flip side, we have a P-type semiconductor, and you can think of this P positive charge. So what happens here is instead of incorporating an element with one more electron, you incorporate an element with one less. So this creates an empty space. And when we're talking about these empty spaces, we call them holes. So hole is just an absence of an electron. And when you're describing it, it can be thought of as completely opposite to that of an electron. So electrons have negative charge, we think holes is having positive charge. So what happens is that these extra spaces, these extra places for us to put electrons, exist very, very close to the valence band. So it takes very little energy to take an electron from here and put it into one of these spaces. And once that happens, once that electron moves, you then have your hole in your valence band. So a P-type semiconductor promotes the presence of holes in the valence band. Now, how does this all come together? So this diagram is one that I've recreated based on one in the textbook, The Physics of Solar Cells. And what we're looking at here is this is a basic setup for a solar cell. So you're going to have an absorber, and for the purposes of our example, we can think of this as your intrinsic pure silicon semiconductor. And that semiconductor is then going to be sandwiched between an N-type on one side and a P-type on the other. So you get this squish sandwich effect here. And again, when we're looking at this diagram, energy is going up the y-axis here. Here's your N-type, your absorber, your P-type. And then these black lines here, the solid black line, represents the energy level of the valence band. This solid black line here represents the energy of the conduction band. So your absorber is going to do what it's going to absorb. It's going to take the energy and bring it into the structure. So you'll have light coming in here. Your photon of light is going to interact with an electron that exists in the valence band. This electron is going to be bumped up to the conduction band. So once it's there, it's then free to move. So what causes the force that's going to make it move? And that's going to be the N-type and P-type semiconductors on either side. And the Handbook of Photovoltaic Science and Engineering does a really good job of explaining this, and it uses the analogy of a semi-permeable membrane. So that's something we talk about when we talk about like osmosis in biology class, where water can move through a membrane, but it blocks other things from moving with it. So that's essentially what the N-type and the P-type semiconductors on either side will do. They're going to act as a semi-permeable membrane. So your N-type, as we remember, promotes negative charge. So it's going to allow electrons that have been promoted into your conduction band and your absorber to move into the N-type semiconductor, but it won't let holes move. The holes in the valence band can't move this way. And on the other side, p-type is going to promote holes in the convection band. So any holes created in the absorber are free to move into p-type semiconductor, but electrons are not. So then this creates a concentration gradient. So as the sun comes in, and you'll get a whole bunch of photons, not all of them will interact with electrons, but the ones that do, bump it up. So then you have holes here and electrons here, and these concentrations keep increasing as light keeps coming in. But you don't have any electrons here, and you don't have any holes here. So that creates, you have a high concentration in the middle with low concentration on either side. These electrons are going to want to move this way, and these holes are going to want to move this way. So once that happens, once you have this flow happening, that's when you get electricity. And then in a solar cell, on either side of this, you're going to have some kind of electrode and then a wire to complete the circuit. These electrons that flow this way will then flow through the electrode into the wire, and that's when you get your electricity. And when you think about this, anytime you have an electron moving in one direction, you're going to have a hole moving in the opposite direction. The hole is just the absence of the electron. So that's how it works. That's how we're taking this light energy and transforming it into electrical energy that we can use. So we talked about a little bit about light, we talked a little bit about band structure, we talked a little bit about conductivity and how that works, and then we brought it all together, we summed it up, and we used this to describe how solar cells work. So I hope you learned a little bit today. I hope I've piqued your interest in the topic. There's a lot more to learn. This is just a very basic structure. Scientists have taken it much further than that, incorporating other things to increase efficiency. They've changed types of absorbers, the structure, how the solar cells are put together. But hopefully what we're working towards is an alternative source of energy for our future. So thanks again for listening.